I want you to picture something. It's 1984. You walk into a bookstore and there's this massive novel on the front table. 387 pages, no author you've ever heard of. And the cover is a submarine trailing through black water. You pick it up. 7 million copies later, and Tom Clancy had invented a genre. And 6 years after that, Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin put it on the screen. Today on Fireside Writer, we're kicking off a new series, Page to Screen. We're going to talk about thriller and crime novels that made it to film. Break down what worked on the page, what changed, and what survived, and what writers can learn from both versions. We're starting with The Hunt for Red October, and I'll be up front. This one's personal. Welcome to Fireside Writer. I'm TJ Stecker, crime fiction writer, former naval flight officer, and attorney. My first novel, Redacted, involved military cover-ups, defense contractors, and the kind of institutional rot that happens when no one is looking. So yeah, Tom Clancy has always felt personal. If you're new here, this channel is for writers who take craft seriously, specifically crime and thriller writers who want to blend commercial appeal with literary quality. Hit subscribe and like this video if that sounds like you. It helps more than you know, and it keeps the fire going. Now, let's go hunt a submarine. The Hunt for Red October was published in 1984 by the Naval Institute Press, which is remarkable in itself. It wasn't a commercial publisher. It was an academic and professional press that had never published a novel. They took a chance on a 36-year-old insurance salesman from Maryland who had never been in the military, never worked in intelligence, yet he somehow wrote one of the most technically accurate submarine thrillers ever put on paper. The premise is clean. Marko Ramius, a legendary submarine commander in the Soviet Navy, is taking the Red October, a new, near-silent submarine, on its first mission to test the crew and the ship. But that submarine commander goes rogue, and the Soviets don't know what he's doing. And it's not until Jack Ryan, a U.S. CIA officer, realizes that Marko Ramius might be defecting. Both superpowers are chasing the same submarine. The Americans want to grab it. The Soviets want to sink it. And Ramius just wants to land on American soil without getting everyone killed. What Clancy did that almost no one had done before was treat the military as a living organism, a living, breathing thing. Multiple command levels, multiple competing agencies, multiple countries. This book shifts POV constantly. Americans, Soviet, British, and yet somehow keeps you oriented. That was genuinely revolutionary in popular fiction at the time. So let me break down 3 things that Clancy does on the page that are worth studying as a writer. First, the insider perspective is a trust mechanism. Clancy never condescends. He explains sonar, diving planes, torpedo geometry, and nuclear deterrence doctrine. But he does it as if you're already in the room. That confidence creates an almost involuntary trust. You believe everything is accurate because Clancy believes it. That lesson matters for any thriller writer. You don't have to dumb it down. You have to own it. Second, Ramius is the moral center. The most interesting character in the book isn't Jack Ryan. It's Marko Ramius. He's a Soviet. By every measure, he should be an antagonist. But Clancy builds his motivation carefully. A wife who died because of Soviet bureaucratic negligence. A lifetime of service to a system he no longer believes in. His defection isn't ideological. It's personal. And that makes it universal. The best thrillers give you a villain who makes sense from the inside. And funnily enough, the book describes Ramius as a short, round oaf. But they cast Sean Connery, and besides having a Scottish accent who makes no attempt at a Soviet accent, would be anything other than a short, round oaf. Yet his casting is perfect. Third, bureaucracy is drama. This is something crime and thriller writers miss all the time. Some of the most tense scenes in The Hunt for Red October aren't submarine chases. They're conference rooms or intelligence briefings, arguments between admirals and politicians about who gets to make the call. Clancy understood that in real crises, the friction isn't just tactical. It's institutional, and the friction is inherently dramatic. The film, here's what it changed. The 1990 film, directed by John McTiernan, who just come off Predator and Die Hard, is one of the most faithful adaptations of a techno-thriller ever made, and it's still one of the best. But things changed. They had to. The book jumped all over the place with POV, from Americans to Soviets to British, between submarines and the Pentagon, and Downing Street. That all gets compressed, significantly. The film essentially becomes Ryan's movie. The Soviet side is maintained through Ramius and a few key officers, but the sprawling institutional drama of the book gets trimmed for the movie down to 135 minutes. The biggest change is that it moves faster than the book's investigation. In the book, Ryan's theory and Ramius defecting takes time to develop. The reader lives in the ambiguity longer. In the film, we get confirmation earlier. partially because you can't sustain that level of ambiguity in the visual medium without losing the audience, and partly because you have Sean Connery on the screen, and no one's going to buy him as the villain for too long. And what the film adds that the book can't is the submarines. McTiernan's use of underwater cinematography, low-frequency audio design, the claustrophobia of those corridors. That's the film doing something the book can only approximate. The book tells you it's tight, dark, and loud, but the film shows you. Now here's where it gets interesting for writers. The book has a character named Skip Tyler, a submarine design officer who helps Jack Ryan figure out the caterpillar drive driving the Red October. He's on the screen for about 90 seconds. In the book, he's a full character with a family, a normal life, and watching him connect the technical dots is one of the more satisfying things in the novel. That's what adaptations almost always strip away. The people adjacent to the central story. The book has room for them. The film doesn't. And if you're a novelist, that's your competitive advantage. You can give depth to people the camera would cut away from. The analyst at the third desk. The sailor who keeps the logs. The wife of the man making the decision. Clancy knew this. His books are full of those people. The other thing the film loses is the Soviet perspective at depth. The book gives you Soviet officers who are fully realized. Men who believe in what they're doing, or have stopped believing, or are terrified of what Ramius might actually be. The moral complexity on the Soviet side gets flattened in the film. They become largely just the threat. For writers, if your antagonist only makes sense from outside of their own perspective, your character isn't fully written yet. Now I said this one's personal, and here's why. My protagonist in Redacted, Jeff Coburn, is assigned to the Pentagon when he stumbles on a conspiracy and a cover-up involving his late uncle. It involves a defense contractor fraud scheme that reaches into the upper levels of the Pentagon and to the Senate. When I was writing those scenes where Jeff was in a briefing room or navigating chain of command, or figuring out who he can actually trust inside a bureaucracy, Clancy was in my head. Not just as a model, but as permission. Permission to trust the reader with institutional complexity. Permission to let tension live between a conversation between a lieutenant and a colonel. Permission to write a protagonist who wins with analysis and information rather than just through brute force. Jack Ryan is not an action hero. He is a scholar, and he saves the day by being the only person in the room who asks the right questions. And that's a useful model for thriller and crime writers who want to build protagonists who are smart rather than invincible. And from the film, I learned something about momentum. McTiernan never lets you settle. Even the slow scenes have urgency beneath them. That's pacing. As a writer, I try to make sure even my quietest scenes are leaning towards something. The Hunt for Red October is a case study on what a debut novel can be when a writer goes all in on authenticity. Trust the reader's intelligence and builds antagonists worth respecting. The film is a lesson of what survives the compression of adaptation and what you can only do on the page. Drop a comment. Which adaptation do you think nailed it? Or tell me which book-to-film adaptation would you want me to cover next? Thanks for subscribing to Fireside Writer. I'm TJ Stecker. I'll see you on the next one.